It's Monday, August 19th. I'm Grant Herms, and we are 77 days away from the election, and welcome to today's Make It Make Sense mini-episode. Today is the first day I'm doing these on video, so bear with me a little bit. There might be some tech glitches here, but more importantly, today is the first day of the Democratic National Convention. Now, if you didn't listen to yesterday's MIMS mini, I talked all about what the schedule will be for the next 4 days. This convention in Chicago lasts from Monday to Thursday. Tonight is all about Joe Biden, honoring his legacy with the Democratic Party and framing his decision to drop out of the race as a noble act of patriotism. Now, since I'm recording this before the main programming tonight, before the main speeches tonight, I'm not going to be able to tell you exactly what's happening, but I figured this might be a good time to explain why we have these conventions at all and what actually happens at them outside of the speeches, and I promise to try to make this as interesting as possible and not some boring civics lesson. So we didn't always have political conventions. In fact, in the first 40 years or so in American history, the nominees of the major political parties were nominated by members of the party who were just in Congress, and it was a decision that was done outside of the voters. These people were just sort of elevated through the party. And then in 1824, we get the first candidate who's elected by a true party convention, but it's still only in the House of Representatives, but they're voting on different candidates and deciding between who might be the nominee, who won't be the nominee. This was done partly because it just took a long time to get anywhere. So when you elected a representative of the House, they voted in your place, but it's also why in the 1800s and early 1900s, you get really powerful party bosses in these smoky backroom deals because major decisions like, who could become president were actually decided in those places. Now, that's not to say there wasn't a national vote. There was. It was just how the candidates got chosen was pretty far from the ballot box. And then after that, it's more than 100 years until we get our first true major national party convention, and that is the National Republican Party Convention in 1931. Now, there were primaries, but they mattered a lot less than they do now. For instance, the people who were sent to a convention on behalf of their state didn't necessarily have to vote for the person their state did, like most of them have to do now, which meant the conventions meant a lot more because they were like an audition for different candidates more than just, we did the primaries, this is how the vote goes. What we understand as the convention process doesn't happen until 1972, which I have to admit, every time that I look at that number and that year, it seems like this happened so late to how long we feel like these have been going on, but that's the truth. Now, in the 60s and 70s, the parties underwent massive changes in votership, which states they control, and frankly, what they stood for more or less reversed. You can look at a lot of the data on this, and it's due almost entirely to the civil rights movement. And in the middle of that, they become the parties that we know today, and all of these changes then, the parties decided that the primaries need to matter a lot more, and that's how we get the primaries and the conventions that we see today. What actually happens at a convention? Well, originally it was about setting the party platform, which is the list of values and policies that the party is going to stand on. And of course, it's also about nominating the candidates. And the people who actually do the voting for that are called delegates. You technically vote for them when you vote in a primary. It's kind of complicated. Don't think about it too hard. For Democrats and Republicans, there are two kinds of delegates. The first kind are the people who are state party officials or activists, and they are usually bound by party rules to vote for whoever the state picks in the primary. Those are the people whose names are on the ballot underneath the main candidate's name when you go to vote in the primaries. And then there are a second group of delegates. Now, for Republicans, they're usually national party members, and they have to vote the way their state did. For Democrats, this group of delegates can be party officials, elected officials like members of Congress or governors or other important party people. They aren't bound by their state votes, and they used to be called superdelegates because they had capes. I'm kidding. They had outsized power in the primary process, and those rules more or less got changed in 2020, so they have less power now, and they're not really considered super delegates anymore. The nominating process is kind of weird, too. It's the part where everyone stands in a big group on the convention floor under big signs that say the names of their states, and then they pledge themselves to the candidate with usually a bunch of descriptions about their state, like the delegates of the great state of Wisconsin, home to the most cheese curds per capita, or the great state of Maryland, home to the blue crab racing champion of the country. Like, it's both cringe and quaint at the same time. I kind of like it, but it is their chance to represent their state on the largest political stage these people will probably ever be on. So, shooters got to shoot, right? Once the delegates are formally pledged, the nomination is set, but not technically official until the candidate actually accepts that in their acceptance speech. This year for the Democrats, it's a little different. The Democrats did a virtual vote of delegates a couple weeks ago, and Harris became the official nominee then, mostly for legal and financial reasons. So the nomination at this convention will mostly just be for show. Also, a couple interesting things for this year at the DNC. The party put out a little bit of info about the delegates. The oldest delegate at the DNC this year is former President Jimmy Carter, who is 99 years old, and the youngest is 17-year-old Isaac Winkler from Minnesota, who will turn 18 just before Election Day. Those really aren't that important. I just think they're kind of neat. Now, at the convention, it's not just speeches at night. I mean, it is mainly those things, but they also have days and days of meetings with different groups or committees and caucuses. Now, these are things like the Black Caucus or the Gun Rights Committee or the Economic Committee or the LGBTQ Caucus. They hammer out the nitty-gritty of the policies that gets put together for the official party. They also serve as a way for everyone to get on the same page and get their marching orders for when the convention is over. Now, again, these matter less than they used to because it doesn't take a month to get home by covered wagon or, a week by train to get anywhere across the country anymore. But it's how the parties make sure that they have the exact policies and the exact ideas and the exact talking points about those things that they want in every place they want them. There are also training seminars for party members, political activist groups also trying to make headway in their causes are at these events. It's sort of just a melding of the minds for both of the parties at their, obviously, respective conventions. Now, that leads me to this next part here. Who's invited to these things anyway? Well, the delegates are invited, obviously, elected officials who aren't delegates and their families, and usually some of their staffers, then other party dignitaries and guests and credentialed media. A lot of times celebrities are invited to this too as a part of the whole showcase aspect of it. Now, I talked a little bit about this in yesterday's MIMS Mini, but this year is the first convention that content creators and influencers have been invited to a convention. Democrats have invited some of them as independent journalists, others as guests of the party who are sort of expected to toe the line more, but we've never seen anything like this, and it signals an understanding of the reach that these people online have. Now, again, sadly, I am not one of these people. I'm going to be watching this online like the rest of you, but still, the convention is being streamed on places like Instagram and TikTok and Twitch for the first time. It's also going to be streamed in vertical video so people can watch it on their phones, and then it can be shared on social media easier. Now, this hasn't gone without some controversy. Invitations and credentials to the convention aren't unlimited. The United Center, where the convention is being held in part, still has a maximum capacity, and there are still security concerns. So credentials and invites that went to creators and influencers didn't go to as many journalists as they have in the past, and that understandably has ruffled some feathers at outlets that now have to send fewer people or will be able to cover the conventions less. Also, the creators go around the traditional media and reach audiences, which some of the big outlets grumbled about because it took away some of their power when it came to exclusivity of coverage of these things. But they still get prime access, and there are still makeshift studios there. They're still the big name players. They just didn't like that they didn't get everything they wanted. The last thing, the convention is just a giant party. It's a chance for members of the party to come together and celebrate the causes they believe in. It's a chance to rally around a candidate that they're excited about and be passionate and be around passionate and like-minded people all moving in the same direction. It's like any other massive group event, except this one has some of the nerdiest people in the country this side of Comic-Con at it, which makes for a lot of great people watching too, if I'll be honest, because the fashion choices are bonkers. Lots of Uncle Sam beards and patriotic pants and buttons and pins and so many sequins. Also, the hats are always the wildest things you've ever seen outside of whatever someone wears at a Met Gala. It's the easiest way to get spotted in a crowd, and there's a giant crowd, and those people with these hats are usually more than willing to talk on camera because they want to be seen. That's why they wore the hat. Also, don't be surprised if you see a bunch of people wearing these flat-brimmed, wide straw hats. They're called boaters, and they've been a symbol at conventions for a long time. They got their start as a symbol of the women's right to vote movement, but it just sort of turned into an unofficial uniform for conventions on both the left and the right for more than 70 years now. There's also some people who say that it actually has nothing to do with women's suffrage. It actually was from a old convention in Philadelphia where things were so hot that the straw hats were just cooler to wear. I don't know. I kind of like the idea that it has some other kind of symbology to it, but take your pick. Okay, I think that's probably enough here. If you're even still listening, I think that these things are very fun. So if you stuck with it all the way through on this one, I really appreciate it. Please rate and review this show if you liked it, and make sure that you're following along so you don't miss any of these episodes in whatever podcast app you use. You can also follow and share this podcast on social media. It helps a lot to get the word out. It's MIMS News Pod. It's MIMS News Pod. It's all one word on all the platforms, including YouTube now. So smash the like button and hit the bell or whatever I'm supposed to say as a YouTuber now. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Make It Make Sense Substack. It's got more writing from me, extra content like extended interviews, and a lot more. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Herms, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.